Let me just, by way of introduction, can we have the first slide just so you have a sense of who I am and what's happening? This should be... Bang! This is Mrs. Brown. I'm afraid she studied at Bristol. But hopefully you'll forgive her. She teaches at a school literally around the corner, which is pretty brutal estate. She's been held at knife point twice. I'm very proud of my wife. Next photograph. This is Miss Brown. Go for it, man. Push the button. That's not the baby. Yes. This is my little crazy redhead. Go next photograph. This is revealing probably. Yeah, this is standard. This is the only way I'm allowed to watch the rugby is if I have a pamper session prior. Next one. I'm really proud of. I read this article. I don't know, a couple of years ago, just after she was born. And we had really good banter, the other dads on the streets and in church about kind of like, got to protect our daughters. A couple of us actually went out and bought baseball bats for the first time the boy came round the house. And then I read this article about how, bring up your daughters so they themselves are kind of intimidating, are wonderful, impressive. So, grasp life. So we went go-karting, this was awesome. It went a bit too far. A couple of months ago in Sunday school. Barney Gobbett, the son of the pastor, he's 4, okay? This was bullying. And he came over and he pushed Ella, who was 3, and Ella looked at him for a minute and then headbutted him. So I feel like my lessons as a father are going really well. And the next photograph, this is Freddie Thomas Bear Brown. Yes, I did call him Bear. Freddie Thomas Bear Brown. Hey, there we go. Next slide. Go for it, man. Okay, Acts 2 verses 40 to 47. Tonight and running over the weekend, we're going to be looking at different passages from Acts. Let me start the timer so I don't run massively over. I am Welsh, so I have a tendency to talk. Now listen, primarily when you get together in churches and you get together in CUs and hall groups and small groups, whatever, primarily we want to be coming to look at Christ. Who he is, what his claims are, what his character is like. He is always where we should be starting. And it's great to be here and that you guys have already been doing that in abundance. Incidentally, I read your mission report. Have you read the mission report? Yes. Read your mission report. It's awesome. Who are your missioners? Dad was one of your missioners. No, who was your missioners? Michael Green. Michael Green. Dad sent me Michael Green's mission report. Yeah, that's my dad. Anyway, but your mission report was amazing. So I'm delighted that you guys are diving into Scripture, that you're sharing Jesus. That's wonderful. At the same time, we can't always truly understand who Jesus is unless we also come to grips with what Jesus and his followers said about the nature of his community and his people. And one of the things we always want to get our heads around when we come to Christianity is it true? Did it really happen? Is there a God? Is Jesus the Son of God? Is it real? And so on. And unfortunately, it's almost impossible to come to grips with the plausibility and the credibility of Christianity without looking at the church as well, without looking at the people of God. Why? Because all the arguments against the existence of God and all the arguments against the existence of truth do not create doubts in the heart like the church does, like Christians do. Good old G.K. Chesterton, who looks like he's embracing Movember with a vengeance, said the main argument against the truth of Christianity are Christians themselves. The main reason here in the UK, the main reason in Bath that people don't believe in Christianity is because of the Christians. Is that a nice encouraging start for your house party? Guys, you're a discouragement. No. But let me put it in the worst possible way. Let me describe it in the way that gives me cold sweats, if you like. This is what creates the most doubts in me. If Jesus is so great, why is the church the way it is? Why are CUs like they are? If Jesus Christ is so great, why do Christians act like they do? There's little that creates doubt like that sometimes. Some of my friends have really struggled with it. It's like, oh, you might be different, but the rest of the Christians, yeah, that's a real problem for me. And ultimately, we can't come to grips with the plausibility of Jesus Christ and Christianity unless we get to grips with his people. So we have to come to grips with what we should be as a Christian community. To believe in Jesus, we have to do so in spite of Christians. Okay? And unless we have a better understanding of what we as believers are called to, then we're going to have some serious doubts. A second thing by way of introduction, if each of us wants to intelligently commit to Jesus, then we have to realize what he is calling us into. And the simple fact is that what Peter is doing in this little text tonight, these 7-8 verses on the day of Pentecost, what he's saying in the very first sermon after the founding of the church, and there's this really heavy line, okay? Save yourselves from this corrupt generation. And Peter is not asking for private and individual conversion. Peter is asking for a united identification with a whole new community, a new society, and a new humanity based around Jesus Christ. And these Christians that he's preaching to are moving from the world society that they were currently committed to into Christianity. In other words, when Jesus calls you, if you're going to intelligently commit yourself, then you have to realize that you're not just called into an individual relationship with him, but you're also called into a new community. And so you can't then know everything Jesus has planned for us. That's part of the adventure of becoming a Christian. And when Jesus calls us, we're also not called into personal, private, inward-facing relationships where all our needs are met. Instead, we're called to be part of an outward-facing community. So tonight, essentially by way of introduction, I want us to have a look at this little text and work out what the main characteristics of Christian community, of your Christian community, really should be. Tomorrow morning we're going to look at individual responses to Christ and the relationship with him. Tomorrow afternoon we'll look at our relationships with each other. And then on Sunday we're going to finish by looking at our relationship with the whole world out there. Does that sound passable? Yes. Amazing. Thank you. But let's start by having a look particularly at this wonderfully rich sentence from Peter. So Peter says, save yourselves from a corrupt generation. This is such a heavy sentence. Peter is first of all teaching the depth of the salvation that is on offer. The depth of the salvation that's on offer. In other words, when he offers salvation, does he say, if you have Jesus as your Saviour, you'll have forgiveness of sins? He does say it, but so much flipping more. Does he say you'll have peace in your hearts and strength to face life? Yes, but so much more. This verse shows us the incredible depth and the extraordinary comprehensiveness of salvation that's on offer for us. Why do we know we're being offered that? All because of this one word, corrupt. Have a look at in your Bibles, your translations. Now, this word corrupt in different translations ends up being translated in a whole load of different ways. The old King James had this crooked generation, meaning kind of dishonest or embezzlers. It doesn't really work. And the reason translators kind of struggle to translate it is that it actually means something like malformed or disintegrating. So crooked suggests that the generation we're escaping from is hobbling along on Zimmer frames. But what Peter is trying to communicate here is not that this generation is unusually messed up. Instead, he's trying to communicate the plain fact of existence, that is that everything is actually falling apart. Our human existence is always falling apart. There's lots of smiles in the room, and it means it's hitting home. Yeah. And Peter is saying that he wants to address that. I don't just want to tell you about forgiveness of sins. I don't want you to go away from this weekend with a better, warmer, fuzzy feeling. I don't want you to feel slightly less guilty about some of those relationships and conversations you haven't had. Peter wants to talk about the radical disintegration of human existence. What on earth does that mean, Brown? Physically, everything is falling apart. Let me give you a really random example, okay? Christmas is on the horizon. There's a great photograph of a cooked turkey coming up. Apologies if you're a vegetarian. Christmas is on the horizon, and I'm guessing a good number of us will be having turkey on Christmas Day. And when you cook the turkey, you take it out pretty quickly. It's hot. You really enjoy it in the moment. Some of us do anyway. And then maybe an hour or two later, it's cooled down just in time for those wonderful turkey sandwiches. Massive plate of chips. Way too much. If you leave the turkey out over the Christmas weekend, by the time you get to Monday, it will start to have started to stink. Christmas candles no longer effective. Leave the turkey out over the rest of the holiday until you go back to university. And now it's become this festering health hazard. Make a turkey sandwich and that might be the end of you. Leave the turkey out until Easter and it becomes just this fleshless, rotted carcass. Do you get the idea? It's a great, or rather it's a horrendous image of what's happening to us. Everything is falling apart. It disintegrates. Scientists will tell us that since the Big Bang, I'm not a scientist, so feel free to quiz this, that since the Big Bang, all energy is dissipating, everything is running down, the clock can never be turned back, the universe is spreading, everything is expanding, everything is going to disorder, everything is falling down. That's true physically, but also in every other area of our lives. It's true intellectually as well. If you study philosophy, you know that anything written 50 years ago or so is now considered laughable. Writing a cutting-edge book these days, it'll be out of date in a decade or less. I finished most of my PhD research 7 years ago. One of my chapters was out of date 3 months later. It was a good PhD as well. Think about relationships and friendships. Unless you're working incredibly hard at them, they fall apart. Maybe some of you freshers feel that about your school relationships. Friends from home, friends from school, a couple of months away from them, and already you know that those relationships are different. You drift apart from people. Little misunderstandings creep in. Families fall apart. The more foolish and selfish we are, the sooner they get damaged. How about your relationship with God? Very few people actually connect well with God, in all honesty. But those who have will tell you that if you relieve your relationship with God on one side for any length of time, a numbness creeps in. Everything is running down. And once you realize that, you will realize that the deepest longings of our hearts are in complete disharmony, that's Welsh, disharmony, with the world as it is. We want to live, but everything dies. We want significance, but everything is insignificant. Eventually the sun will burn and everything we've done won't make any difference. We want love, but all love dies. So here's the question, standard apologetic question. Our deepest feelings are totally at odds with the world as it is. The thing we most want and deeply desire, the world can't give us. So is the human heart malformed? Or is the world having issues and is somehow itself malformed? Something's wrong either way. And either human hearts are seriously bent out of shape or else our world has been bent out of shape. Now, of course, the Bible tells us, hopefully you all know, that our human hearts are right. The human heart wants to live forever. We were built to live forever. The human heart wants eternal love, and we were built for eternal love. The human heart wants significance, and each one of us was built for significance. But the Bible and the Bible alone gives us a way of understanding our situation and our predicament. Only the Bible can tell us how the world could have produced beings who all really want so much more than what our world actually has. And of course, Genesis 3 tells us why everything is falling apart. We're told that humans, even though we were built to love God, we decided to go our own way, and when we did that, everything stopped working the way it should. But we're also told that one day God's power would come back into the world to restore everything, to renew everything, and to change everything. Someday he'll come back. Someday the power will come back. Peter, here in Acts 2, is promising that now. You see, the Old Testament made these kinds of statements and promises about why the world was falling apart. But things were going to change. Have a look at Isaiah 65. It says, "See, I will create a new heaven and a new earth. The former things will not be remembered. They will come to mind. The sound of weeping and crying will be heard in it no more." These are the types of promises. And here in Acts 2, when Peter begins to preach, he says something similar. Save yourselves from the corrupt generation. You can see in all of Peter's early sermons, so here in Acts 2 and in Acts 3, he says exactly the same kind of thing. This is what he's saying. These are the claims he's making, okay? That's why in Acts 3 he says, wait for the Christ. When he comes back, he'll restore all things. And even now he says in chapter 2, the last days are here and the Spirit is put out on all flesh. Now what does that mean? It's super simple. Peter is saying, I've been saved, and it is totally comprehensive. I have a salvation to offer everyone that will reverse the corrupting power of human existence. I have a power that is greater than the power of the world, that automatically makes relationships fall apart and bodies fall apart and our relationship with God fall apart, and automatically makes family relationships crumble, civilizations disintegrate, cultures fall apart, ideas fall apart. And I've got something, Peter says, that will heal the results of all sin and all disintegration. I've got something that can heal physically and spiritually and emotionally and socially. Heal in every way. You getting this from the one sentence? And this power is in the world now. And I can offer it to you now, and it can begin the healing effect. And there'll be a day coming when it'll be complete. And that's what he's offering. He's not offering just a little bit of help or a little bit of inspiration. I don't know about each of you, but when you see Christ for the first time, we still so often say, I just need some way of dealing with my everyday problems. So I'll kind of lean on Christ for that, to deal with the everyday problems. And Peter here is effectively storming in. He's laying the smack down with a vengeance and says, just give up on those tiny ambitions. That's not even an ambition. Forget those small everyday issues. I want to give you a salvation that deals with every type of disintegration and every type of corruption. So first thing, Peter is teaching the depth of the salvation. There's only 2 points, don't worry. Point 2, we also see in this one phrase the form of the salvation he offers. Okay, I know you're 100% likely to be exhausted, but just try and follow me carefully, because this is utterly glorious, okay? This is a great way to start the weekend. We're mainly Westerners, I guess, in this room tonight, and we live in a secular UK. And when we think of salvation, we almost always think of some kind of power coming straight out of heaven or straight into us, something that comes from God and pours right down to us. But Peter says, let me tell you what I'm going to give you. The form of salvation comes as a new generation. Look at the text. Get out of the old generation and let me baptize you so I can get you into a new one. What's this about? Let's think about that word generation for just a minute, okay? It's a great word. It's a provocative word. People love throwing it around a little bit, okay? It's a new generation, eh? Just to be a little bit dramatic. We suddenly got obsessed with talking about it in 1999. Baby boomers, Generation X, Depression generation, millennials, and so on. But listen to this quote, okay? This is from this wonderfully erudite guy called Alexis de Tocqueville. There he is, smart gent. And he said, in democratic nations, each generation is a new people. So a generation is a people, a worldview that results from certain formative historical events. A generation is a group of people who've experienced certain formative historical events that have shaped their whole view of reality. And it doesn't make them just a generation, it makes them a whole new people. What do I mean by new people? In a culture, we have radically different views of what's important, different views of how you spend your money, how you relate to other races, how you handle suffering, how you deal with pain. In a people, in a culture, all of those things are viewed differently. And so a people is a comprehensive worldview. a view of reality that affects everything. And those people are also transformed by distinct stories. Something has happened to them or has influenced them, and that's why they are a new people. Okay, let me give you some examples. For most of our grandparents or great-grandparents, they had World War II. And for them it was really easy to see that here's the good and here's the bad. It's a war, but it's a just war for them. It's good versus evil. Then our parents had things like the Gulf War, maybe. It's utterly different. It was a total mess. Nothing was clear. So 2 generations, and there's a huge difference in terms of attitudes to nationalism, patriotism, authority, government, country, the list goes on. It's massive. A generation has a whole new worldview because of informative events. Now here's what Peter is saying. Stick with me. When you become a Christian, you're not joining just a club. Christianity is not something just for Sunday mornings or in private time behind closed doors. Christianity is not just for some kind of release. So you're a student at Bath University and you're working hard and you're getting work experience. Maybe you're doing a job. Life is full. Maybe you're overworking. And you might go and join a uni sports team, or maybe you join Bath University Curry Appreciation Society. For some fun. Do you want to put the web page up? It's a good web page. For some fun, Facebook page, some relief, something to make you feel better. The cheap curry socials are a great way to blow off steam. Maybe the, quote, sweet deals on the best curry houses in town provide some much needed distraction. Maybe you work a little less as a result of joining this society. But fundamentally, being a member of Bath University Curry Appreciation Society, or NITSOC, which sounds really exciting, or the Chamber Choir, or the Backstage Technical Service Society, it doesn't change the way in which you do your degree and prepare you for what comes after university. It doesn't change your motivation for how you do your degree. It won't fundamentally change how you see money or how you view the people you're studying with. Christianity is different. You don't take up Christianity as another hobby. You don't do Christianity as a nice, quiet, fuzzy pastime, just to help you chill out and feel good in and around your busyness. Peter is saying this quite clearly. It's not a club. It's not something to help you work through the superficialities of your life. When you become a Christian, each of you became a member of a new generation. You got out of your old generation, and here's why, okay? Because now you, the Christian, know that you have a story that surpasses all other stories. It's a universal story. It's a global story, and it's a story of how God has come into history and has created a people for himself. That's what's so unusual about Christianity. Every other religion says salvation and rescue comes through principles. Every other religion says, here are the principles, now do them, and you'll live life to the fullest. But the Bible says salvation was actually done through a real historical event. This is why Christianity creates a whole new generation. It creates a whole new people. Something happened in history. Something far more formative than any war, far more formative than any act of government, act of terror, act of nature. Nothing is more formative and significant for our lives than this story. And what's the story? The story is that God in the Garden of Eden created the world to be a garden, but because we turned away from him, it became a jungle. But he didn't give up on us. There's a dark night in Genesis 15. And God appears to Abraham and says, I have come into the world, I'm going to make a people here, and I'm going to make them out of your descendants. Genesis 15. And in this people, I'm going to show the world how they should be living, or how they could be living. I'm going to create a nation among nations that will show other nations how to live. And I'm going to come into this people, and by my love and power, I'm going to change the way in which they do everything. How they view themselves, how they handle their money, how they look at society and culture, how they view their degrees, how they view work. I'm going to create a people. And on that dark night back in Genesis 15, God took an oath with Abraham. I will create this people no matter what the cost. But the history of the people throughout the Old Testament seems to be one of failure. You should know this. God says, I will come down to this people. If you obey me, I'll live amongst you. Through us, he will be a light to the nations. Then finally, the climax of this extraordinary story. One man shows up. And he's not just part of the people, but the entire history of the people of God is summarized and concluded in him. He comes out of Egypt. He wanders in the wilderness. Follow the pattern. He's tempted. He's fed in the wilderness. Like the people, he's called to care for the orphan and the widow and the poor, and he does. And like the people, he's called to love the Lord with all his heart, soul, and strength, to love his neighbor and himself, and he does. And finally, on a dark night, he pays the price that God said years ago he would pay, at a huge cost. On that night, he bears the curse of the people of God. The curse of the people of God is to be cast out for not obeying him, to be exiled, to be kicked out. And he is exiled. And not just into a different land, but into eternal justice and wrath. And Jesus is exiled not from a place, but from God the Father himself. And now when we receive him, that story becomes our story. That's why when the Bible says, when you become a Christian, you died. What do you mean I died? He died. No, his story is now our story. He died in our place. That's what Christianity is. The Bible gives us an historical narrative. The Bible gives us a story. The Bible gives us historical events. God broke in and he says now Jesus' story will cover your own story. So think about your own stories tonight. If they're anything like mine, then they will be absolutely full of a load of hurt and brokenness and weakness. And then look at our country's story as well. It's pretty messed up. It's pretty broken, falling apart. We could do with a new narrative. We could do with a new background story. We need to be part of a new generation. And I think this is it. Peter says when you become a Christian, you don't try now to live a better existence. You don't try to live like Jesus in the hope God will forgive you. You are now treated as if you had died because you did. You are now treated as if you had been raised, as if you'd lived a perfect life. His story becomes your story. And when it happens, it changes the way you look at everything, or it should do. No longer are you principally affected by your past, but by Christ's past. No longer are you principally affected by your country's past, but by the past of the people of God. And Peter says when you become a Christian, you enter into a new community of people that becomes a visible place where everything is changed by the gospel. Everything is changed by the gospel. So apart from the gospel, there are only two ways of looking at life. At base level, all world cultures respond like this. One route is moralism or religion, where you say there's truth and you'll be saved by following it. And the other approach is relativism or irreligion, if you like. You say there's no truth, and as a result, I'm totally free. But each of those create their own culture. But the gospel is not, there's a truth principle to follow, nor is it no truth. The gospel is truth, and it is a person, not a principle, and he has come and he's fulfilled it for all of us. The gospel transcends all other worldviews. We have the guts of the moralist and the religious, but without the arrogance. And we have the flexibility and we have the love of the relativist without the timidity and weakness. And if you look down through Acts and look at everything we're told about these early believers, why did it flourish and grow? Why did those believers change the world? Look at the end of Acts 2. Go and look at it. People were utterly attracted to these Christians. They had the favor of all the people. They were amazing. And the gospel gave them a unique attitude to the world. It gives us a unique attitude towards our money, our studies, a unique attitude towards people who disagree with us, a unique attitude towards God, a unique attitude to the way we look at ourselves, to see our value and significance, a unique way to look at our emotions and our suffering, a unique way to look at absolutely everything. And that means that our communities, that you, Bath Christian Union, should be a community that looks different. Let me finish with this. How are you doing tonight? Are you a community or are you another club? Are you all the same? Are you all Western and individualistic? Or do people actually look at you as a community and see something utterly different? Are you accountable to each other? Are you doing life richly with each other on campus and beyond? Are you in absolutely committed, sacrificial, and loving relationships with each other? The level of sacrifice of these Acts 2 believers who were hearing and responding to the news of Jesus was incredible. Are you a part of that same generation? Do you see tonight what is offered here? There's a wonderful bit of narrative right at the end of the third book of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Standard, UCCF, got a reference, Lord of the Rings. And Aragorn, who's the rightful claimant to this glorious throne, he rocks up to the great city. He's been victorious in a huge battle against the Dark Lord, but he's not yet able to claim the throne. And inside the city, his friends are sick and dying, so he enters the city, hood up, and in disguise to go to the houses of healing. And then he seeks to heal his friends who are wounded in his battle. And as he performs this healing, one of the attendants repeats this kind of ancient verse, okay? The hands of the king are the hands of a healer, and so shall the rightful king be known. Really quickly, even though he hadn't taken his throne, the good news spreads through the city. The king has come back. He's here in the city. He's healing people. He's putting together his household who will serve him. It's a great story. But it's nowhere near as good as the story of our salvation. All good stories point to his story. And his story is the greatest story. And his story is a true story. Shall I pray? And then there's some questions for you to think about. Father, thank you so much for everyone in this room. Thank you that whatever context and whatever state of mind, whatever state of heart each of us has come to this weekend, that your story remains our story. It doesn't matter how guilty we feel about today, how much we've sinned, how much we feel we've sinned. You're a glorious Father who forgives and has your story to cover our story. And Father, I really pray for these guys that this weekend would be a weekend of wonderful unity, of rich discussion with masses of fun, that they would get to know each other better, they get to know new faces really well. They'd interact with each other warmly and richly. In your Son's glorious name, Amen. There's a couple of questions. If you want to fire them up, that's wonderful. I don't know, in pairs, maybe, or threes.